so good.
Radio Voces Latinas, 1610 AM. A drink of water with Joyce, Aldrich. Refresh your mind.
Welcome to this evening's edition of A Drink of Water, and it is a really nice 17 degrees here at 801 at CHHA 1610 AM. And this evening I'm going to have Salim Mansur on. It's Professor Salim Mansur, and he's a professor of political science at the University of Western Ontario and former columnist for the London Free Press and the Toronto Sun. And he's going to be online tonight talking about his latest book, The Qur'an Problem and Islamism. But before we get to Professor Mansur, I'm going to play a little bit of music from a Toronto group called Rakatak, and some gorgeous world music there. And you can hear them around Toronto and all around. And this is a beautiful instrumental by them, by Rakatak. Enjoy, and while I get Professor Mansur on the line. That was music by Rakatak, some wonderful world music. And online, I have Professor Salim Mansur. Welcome to A Drink of Water.
Hello, Joyce. Thank you so much for having me on your program.
It's an honor and a pleasure, and I'm sure it's going to be really, really interesting because you are an author of note. The most recent book we're going to be talking about tonight is The Qur'an Problem and Islamism, but you've also written A Delectable Lie, a liberal repudiation of multiculturalism, as well as Islam's predicament, perspectives of a dissident Muslim, which is what you call yourself, a dissident Muslim. So let's talk about what you're doing here then with this latest book, The Qur'an Problem and Islamism, and being a dissident Muslim. And I'm really glad I've got you on this evening because next week Ramadan starts, and that is the holiest month of the Islamic year, the Muslim year. And is that not also, that's where that was the month the Quran was revealed to the Prophet. So it seems really appropriate for us to be in this conversation about the origins, the interpretations of the Quran, as discussed in your wonderful book, The Quran Problem and Islamism. That, I'm telling you, that is so easy to understand. Well, it's a heady book. And you're a political, prof, and and this is amazing. You're a political scientist. This is great. But please explain to us what the Quran Problem is.
Yeah. Well, I set out to present to basically the North American readers. They, since 9/11, have been, in some ways, or more than many ways, been thinking about what's wrong with the Muslim world, what's gone wrong, or what is wrong, and why what is happening, that is the violence, the war, the terrorism, the attack, why all this is happening in the 21st century. And that's what I set out to explain with the Quran Problem.
Well, it's true because before 9/11, really, the Muslim people, they were not on the radar in this way for the West. Perhaps within the Muslim community, yes, but for the West, this seemed to come right out of the blue. Like, what happened? Except for those who are politically involved, of course, they would know. But for the general public, we had no idea.
Right. So it seemed that it was out of the blue. I mean, remember 9/11? That was about 17, 18 years now.
That's right.
Ago. And we woke up in horror watching on live TV what was happening. Jetliners being flown right into the World Trade Center, and in front of us, the World Trade Center eventually collapsing and all of that. And then the wars that have gone on and the troubles, and it is not over, and it is going to be continue for some time longer, I think, into the 21st century we are in. So what is this all about? And so that's what I, in my little book, set out to explain the Quran Problem. And what is the Quran Problem? It is simply... Yes, go ahead.
I'm just going to say, we had a little bit of a late start because we had some problems with the line. We've got to go to break at 8:15, so we're going to come back with what the Quran Problem is right after this.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
You are listening to Radio Voces Latinas, 1610 AM. A drink of water.
Yes, if you're just tuning in, this is A Drink of Water. My name is Joyce Aldrich, and I'm on the line with Professor Salim Mansur, who's a political science professor at the University of Western Ontario, and we're discussing his book, The Quran Problem and Islamism. And before we went to break, you were going to talk to us about what that problem is.
Yes, so as I was mentioning, the question, what is the Quran Problem? And let me say this in the following sense. The Quran Problem is what is commonly shared among the Semitic religions, that is the three Semitic faiths, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. They are based upon a sacred text, the scripture. For the Jews, it is the Torah. For the Christians, it is the New Testament. And for the Muslims, it is the Quran. And so these are the Torah, the New Testament, and the Quran. They are scriptures, they are texts, and how it is read, how it is understood, and then how it is implemented, or how people live according to their understanding of the sacred text, becomes the number one issue to the people who believe in those texts. So for the Muslims, it's the Qur'an. And how do you read the Qur'an? And how do you understand it? And how do you then live according to your understanding of what the Qur'an says? Muslims believe that the Qur'an is a revelation. It is the word of God to Muhammad. And so how do Muslims understand the word of God and live according to this? This is a huge, complex, complicated issue. The parallel I might draw for you, Joyce, is last year the world, particularly the West, marked the 500th anniversary of the Lutheran Reformation.
Yes.
That is Martin Luther,
yes,
who in 1517 started a whole new movement. He was not alone in it, but we now reflect back and point out that it was Luther. There were many others. But the whole struggle that erupted was the struggle of how do you understand the Bible and how do you relate the Bible. Do you take the Bible as the interpretation and the reading given by the Vatican in Rome, the Pope and his people, or do you take it and understand it by yourself as an individual? And that struggle...
That's right. And he democratized it. He brought it to the people. He let them read it. It wasn't read to them.
That's right. It was translated, and it was,
it was printed. The Gutenberg Press, everything.
That's right. And it is the beginning of the struggle that led to the making of the modern world in some ways, the separation of religion and state and the whole world, that is Europe, that emerged through scientific revolution, philosophical revolution.
Monarchies were affected.
Exactly. And it did not happen overnight. People forget that.
No.
It took several centuries from then to the present time. Indeed, within our living memory, within your and my living memory and our parents who lived through it, Europe went through 2 world wars.
Yes.
Revolution, Holocaust, killing, murder, all in some ways connected to the struggle of how do you understand your faith. Well, that is what the struggle that is going on in the Islamic world, in the Muslim world. And let me add one more thing as I finish this idea. What is the Quran problem? There are many faces of Islam or many faces of Muslim because they come in many forms and shape in the sense of who they are as people, from Morocco on the Atlantic Ocean and North Africa all the way to Indonesia.
Globally.
From the depths of Africa into Central Asia.
All demographics, all races.
That's right.
Yeah.
And now in North America, so people of immense diversity in terms of ethnicity, language, their own history, and so on and so forth. And so how do these people understand it? Most of the Muslim people are people of the developing world, the third world.
The third world, yes, versus the first world, yes.
And so here is a text, and how do you understand it? This is an issue that has been going on for quite some time, but here in the modern world, we are in the 21st century, the struggle is whether do Muslims remain fixed to the understanding of the Quran, which goes back to medieval time and antiquity. That is, in a sense, a traditional understanding that has come down over hundreds of years. Or do we now understand the Quran in terms of our modern values of science and philosophy and democracy? So the understanding of somebody who is a North American, say, and happens to be a Muslim, as opposed to somebody who is from Yemen or from Iran or from Saudi Arabia or, Africa, their understanding coming from what background they are in is vastly different. And this is the struggle that is going on. And it is a political struggle, just as was the Protestant Reformation. The kings and emperors and states got involved in the struggle because how you understood the Bible had immediate implications of how the society was going to be ruled and governed.
And it was hard to separate church and state because of that, because it was integral. I mean, there'd be a church in the middle of a village. I mean, it was the center of activity. It was how people interconnected, interrelated.
Right. I mean, just think about it. I mean,
It was highly political.
Sort of a parallel illustration or an analogy, an example.
Mm-hmm.
The great breakup of the Catholic Church, the one Christian faith, into Protestant and Catholic, which is now what it is.
There's about 44,000 different, something like that, different type, sects of Christianity now.
There are so many different.
It's incredible.
But the breakup that took place at the time immediately after Luther, for instance, the formation of the Church of England,
mm-hmm.
the Anglican Church. It is amusing, and only amusing, I say, in a historical sense, ironical. The breakup of that church, the formation of the church took place because Henry VIII wanted to marry another woman,
mm-hmm.
another woman, and another woman because he desperately wanted a son.
He wanted an heir, yeah.
About everything else, and he
mm-hmm.
could not carry on doing that, and so he created his own church.
Yeah, Church of England.
That was a political implication.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is a struggle that is happening. Now, you and I, as we are speaking in the middle of 2018, let us do a thought experiment and go back exactly 100 years. What was happening 100 years ago? Exactly now. What was happening was a world war was going on.
There was a world war. There was there was an industrial revolution already happened, but we were now reaping the world war. Politically, yeah. There was communism and world war and
that's right. In May of 1918, Europe was in the middle, or to what now we can see was towards the end of World War I, but World War was going on.
Yeah.
Canadians were involved. Americans had got involved. And indeed, it was a world war. Now, when the war ended in November of 1918,
mm-hmm.
we are going to mark the 100th anniversary this November of the end of the Great War.
Yeah.
When the World War ended, number of empires collapsed. One of the empires that collapsed, which was involved in the World War and was defeated, was the Ottoman Empire.
Mm-hmm.
And the Ottoman Empire was the center of the Muslim world because the leader of the Ottoman Empire was the Caliph. And when the Ottoman Empire was defeated, few years later, the main institution of Islam that was created after the death of the Prophet by his people or by the companions of the Prophet also collapsed and was destroyed.
So that was the last existing caliphate, is what you're saying.
That's right.
Yeah.
It was the caliphate.
The people that ISIS talks about, return of the caliphate.
That's right.
Thereafter.
Well, I mean, there are people who want to bring about the caliphate, but
mm-hmm.
in effect, that was the end of the caliphate
mm-hmm.
as an historical institution,
right? As
a political institution. Now, so from 1918 to now, the Muslim world is basically been struggling as new states were created. At first, European powers took over, and then when the European colonialism ended after 1945,
mm-hmm.
after the Second World War, new states were created.
And the British Empire Africa, as well. It was pulling back.
Correct.
Yeah.
So it was not only the British Empire, it was the French Empire, the Spanish Empire, the Portuguese Empire, and so on.
And they were in India, they were in the Middle East, they were everywhere. Right. Everywhere there were Muslim countries, actually.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So now, for this last 100 years, or for the last 70 years, these countries and the people there have been engaged in the struggle of trying to come to terms with, as I explain in the book, with modernity, with the modern world. There are those who reject the modern world and those who want to come to terms with the modern world and find a way to go forward. I can give you the example of Israel, for instance. This is the 70th anniversary of Israel's independence. Israel was created, established, and the Jews from all over the world made their aliyah, or at least those Jews who wanted to make the aliyah made
Oh, yeah,
the aliyah.
7 million have, over 7 million so far, yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
So, Jews, there were Jews who came from Africa,
yes, the
from
Ethiopians,
the Third World, from the Arab countries, and they had a different cultural background. And the Jews who came from Europe, who survived the Holocaust, the Shoah, and then who came and settled, whether they were from the Netherlands, whether they were the remnants from Germany and France and the European, Poland, etc., or those who went from North America, they were part of the first world. They were part of the modern world.
Yes.
But in Israel, those who came from the Arab countries and the Third World, the Jews, they took time to adapt, to become, make the transition from their own cultural background to become part of modern Israel, which is a modern state, which is a democratic state, which is a scientific wonder.
It is amazing, and we're going to have to go to break on that note because we take a break every so often. So I'm going to go to break, and we're going to continue with this conversation about basically you had said that there's a challenge of non-liberal societies flowing into liberal societies, and about that whole idea of modernity as well. And we'll continue with that thought right after this.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
CHHA 1610 AM. From Toronto, Canada, CHHA 1610 AM, the voice of our community, because we are a part of your daily life.
Listen to us all around the world. Visit chha1610am.ca for new content daily.
You are listening to Radio Voces Latinas, 1610 AM, a drink of water.
I'm Joyce Aldrich, and I'm on the line with Professor Salim Mansur, who has written The Qur'an Problem and Islamism, his recent book. And we were just talking about, before we went to break, about becoming part of the modern world, the first world. They talk about first world problems, but it is a problem for a third world to adapt, to integrate. I don't like to use the word assimilate because I think that really it's an integration thing more than anything, because you have to hold on to your roots, But so let's continue on with that conversation, Dr. Mansur.
Thank you. You were saying assimilate or integrate. I like the word reconciliation. That is, the traditional society making the transition and reconciling with the whole new way that we look at the world, which is the modern world, the modern way of thinking. That is the transition. And just as the Jews and the Christians made that transition, and then the reading of their sacred text over time was adapted. But today, for instance, the Jews and the Christians read the sacred text through the framework and lens of the understanding of the modern world in terms of science and philosophy. To give an example, when Spinoza wrote some 350 years ago, what he was writing as a philosopher, as a scientist, and as a Jew, he was declared a heretic and he was excommunicated.
Oh, yeah.
But today, Spinoza is the most remarkable Jewish philosopher who heralded the modernity to which the Jews made the transition. But that is a huge struggle, and that's what the Muslim world is going. I'll give you another example from inside the Muslim world. Take the case of Iran. Iran...
It was very modern with the Shah.
Yeah, it was in the first half of the 20th century, Iran was trying to modernize, and then under the Shah, after the Second World War, it was rapidly trying to industrialize, modernize, open to the West. Its people were learning new sciences, new philosophy, new technology. the men and women were embracing the modern world. But then a reaction came led by those people who did not accept the modern world. In fact, rejected the modern world. And they said,
that was back in 79?
People around Ayatollah Khomeini, who was the leader of the Islamic Revolution in 1979. He said, and the people around him said, why are you Iranian? Why are we Iranian? We are a people of our own history, of our own culture. Why are we intoxicated with the West? So they coined a word. They coined a word called Westoxification. And they said that, this is unacceptable. And they rejected the West. The sign of the rejection on the symbolical level was growing beard. Women were told that they cannot dress in Western clothes. They have to cover themselves, so on and so forth. It was a rejection of the West.
Right.
Now, that's what has happened in the last 50 years. It's coming on to 50 years, 40 years, 50 years. There has been an internal struggle in the Muslim world, but that struggle was kept in check because of the Cold War. Because on the one side there was the United States, on the other side there was Soviet Union, and the Cold War kept in check. But when the Cold War ended, and the last battle of the Cold War that was fought, ironically, the Americans supported the Taliban in Afghanistan, who were the throwback to the people like Ayatollah Khomeini, who rejected the modern world. And when the war ended, they were in power.
It's ironic, isn't it, really, when they were helping the Shah become modern and then they turned to the Taliban. It's an interesting juxtaposition, really.
That's right. You see, the West supported
It's ironic.
It is ironic. It is paradoxical.
Absolutely.
Because the issue was the Cold War, the Soviet Union and the West, communism and anti-communism. And the Taliban are fighting the communists, so the West supported it.
Yeah, because they were in that area, the southern part of the Soviet area, south of, so very difficult.
Exactly. So there was a very complex situation, geopolitical, strategic, the issue of oil, the issue of, Soviet Union advancing towards the Persian Gulf and the Indian Ocean. So all of that. But the point that I'm coming to is what happened was the people in these part of the world who were trying to move their society forward, to become modern, to reconcile with modernity, they were defeated, they were thrown back. You see, in India, which is a country of over 1 billion people, in China, which is a country of over 1 billion people, they have gone through struggles too. But then the people have made the decision that they want to go forward.
Well, India is a force. It's a world leader. It really is. It really is.
India is the world's largest democracy.
Yeah.
And it's been so for 70 years. But it was colonized. It was it was under the colonial rule of Britain. But India has made the transition. China is still a communist country, but it is becoming a modern country. A civilization that is 4,000 years old, but it is making the transition.
And there's even hope for North Korea now.
Yes.
There's hope for those people.
We're talking about the Muslim world.
Yeah, which is a tribal world, not a democratic world, in essence, right?
Well, it is tribalistic.
Yeah.
It is divided. It is...
democracy and Sharia, they don't really... Do they mix? I don't know.
Well, you are raising these profound questions, whether they make... This is something that the Muslims are struggling to work out. There are Muslim countries, that have, in a sense, gone forward in adopting democratic systems of government, but they're not in the Middle East. They're not Arab countries.
No.
Yeah, for instance, Indonesia, the world's largest Muslim country, has been making the transition to democracy. It has elected governments after the military dictatorship came to an end in the 1990s, and then there have been repeated elections and government has been founded. But Indonesia is within having to struggle with those people who insist that democracy is unacceptable to the Sharia system of government. So
well, that's the difference. Sharia is a system of government. So in Judaism, we do have, Beit Dins, we have Jewish courts, but we always go by the rule of the land. The country you're in.
But Joyce,
that's
Sharia,
what we. But Sharia doesn't do that, does it? No, or can
Sharia,
it?
Sharia is law, Islamic law, and as I said a little while ago, the center of the Muslim world, the Ottoman Caliph, when that system collapsed, with it collapsed many things. And one of the things that collapsed was the rule of the Sharia.
Oh.
Because when the Ottoman Empire was there was the Sharia law among those people around over whom the Ottomans ruled, from North Africa to the Persian Gulf. So now there is a struggle going on. As I said right at the beginning, it took 500 years struggle for Europe to come to terms with the modern system of government.
May I ask you about? I just want to ask you about Erdogan. Erdogan, the leader of Turkey. He's an interesting character. I should say character, leader of a country, because it looks to me like he is trying to help that come back, the caliphate. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm misinterpreting his what's happening with Turkey, because I see them going into Iraq now, and whether their affiliations. Maybe that's another topic for another time. But it just sort of spurred a thought. I don't know.
Well, I mean, you raise the issue of Turkey. There's so many different dimensions, and I think one of the problems in
confusing
in trying to understand another culture, another civilization is that we go over so many different issues, and each issue has its own complexity. There's foreign policy, there is domestic politics, there is the process of scientific development, industrialization, gender issues. So it is a multiplicity of issues.
Sure.
The one word modernity that I have used, or modernization, is a way to capture all of these various dimensions.
Right.
All of these various dimensions exist at all times. In the pre-modern world, people dealt with this problem in a certain way. In the modern world, people deal with this problem in a certain way. The modern world is a democratic, open to democracy, open to a new scientific understanding, philosophical understanding, and therefore the problems are dealt with in those ways. You see, Turkey is a very interesting case. Turkey made the transition. Turkey was at the heart of the Ottoman Empire. After World War I, when the Ottoman Empire was defeated and collapsed, out of the ashes emerged a new state, that is the Republic of Turkey. And the founder of the Republic of Turkey was a man by the name of Mustafa Kemal. And he provided a secular constitution. He basically abolished the Sharia law, and he tried to
the gateway to Europe. Yeah.
He looked towards Europe as an example. That is, again, the word modernization. He tried to modernize Turkey, create a parliamentary system of government, a Republic of Turkey. Now, some 70, 80 years later,
yes.
Erdogan, you mentioned, Erdogan is an elected leader. So the people
wears
who
a suit, presents himself to the West, as a modern man.
So the people who have elected Erdogan are people who find or who believe that Turkey should somehow go back to its own culture, own value that the Ottomans represented. So that's how Erdogan talks at times that he would like a return to Ottomanism. On the other hand, There are other people in Turkey, the people who are loyal to Mustafa Kemal or to the Republic and to the idea of secular government, secular laws. They are resisting it. And you saw a couple of years ago there was some sort of a coup that was taking place.
Yes.
Right,
I remember that. And it reached right out into the Americas and everywhere around the globe.
So what it goes to show, Turkey is a divided society. There are those, on the one hand, who would like to return in some form to its own traditional cultural values.
Yes.
And then there are those in Turkey who say, no, Turkey has to be a modern state.
So this is
a modern country.
So Turkey embodies really that's like a microcosm of what the Islamic world is going through right now.
In a sense, you're right. It is a microcosm that what the Turks are going through, other Muslims are going through the same sort of struggle. In some places, it is very, very difficult, very violent, and in other places it is less violent, or there has been some sort of a transition made.
Yeah.
I mentioned Indonesia. There is Bangladesh, another example. It is
in Africa,
fourth largest Muslim country in the world, and it is in some ways it is building a democratic society. It has had repeated elections, political system, parliament. The Prime Minister of Bangladesh is a woman. You had a woman Prime Minister in Pakistan who was assassinated.
Bhutto, yeah.
Bhutto.
Yeah.
Now, India, I mentioned it is the world's largest democracy, but India is also the world's second or third largest Muslim country. India has had repeated Muslim presidents. Muslims are as much a part of Indian democracy as are people of other religion in India. Hindus are the largest population in India, but there are people who are Zoroastrian, Christians, Muslim, Buddhists, and of course diverse nationalities or ethnicity. And India is a democratic society, so the Muslims are participating in it, and
it seems to be working,
making progress. That's right.
Yeah.
So what we go back to the original question. What is the Qur'an problem?
Okay,
what I try to point out is how the Muslims come to understand the Qur'an through the framework of modern science, modern philosophy, democratic values. That understanding of the Qur'an will be radically different than the understanding of the Qur'an of people who are still living in terms of their thinking and their values in the Middle Ages.
Okay, on that note, we're going to go to break. It'll be the last break of this evening. So we're here with Professor Salim Mansur, and he's talking about his new book, The Qur'an Problem and Islamism, and we're going to get a definition of what Islamism is. We have been hearing it throughout the program. We'll hear it when we come back from break. We'll be right back after this.
You are listening to Radio Voces Latinas, 1610 AM. A drink of water.
Yes, it's 8:47 here at CHHA 1610 AM, and I'm on the line with Professor Salim Mansur. And we were just talking before we went to break about who's going to be able to change, who's going to become modern, become part of the first world, and who's going to have problems. And when people flow into, if people who are coming into, as you say, challenge of non-liberal societies flowing into liberal societies, and then, of course, the difference between Islam and Islamism. There you go. Answer as you will.
Yes. So you see, it is a very difficult process. That is the study of history. That is the understanding of history. There is no magical key out there that you can say that if I could only use this key and ignite the machine, the world will change as I wish. It doesn't happen like that.
No.
It takes a long time. It is a long process. People have to change in terms of their ideas and how they see the world and how they understand the world, or and how they understand their own sacred literature and their religion. And that is what is happening in the Muslim world right now, and that's what I tried to explain.
Well, aren't there are some sects who are sort of overriding, and I'm not saying overriding, maybe not a very good word, but who are predominant in, we see people coming into the West, and we see women who are completely covered up. And I understand a little bit about the House of Saud, and how that came about, and with Wahhabism, and there's another sect that combined with Wahhabism. I forgot. It starts with an S, I think. What was that?
Salafism.
So Wahhabism, Salafism. So they sort of came together and have created. It's the way Saudi Arabia has been working for so long, and that is you see, there's so many Muslim countries, but that's how we seem to. The West is defining a lot of what Islamism, and then they look. Islamism and the politicizing of Islam, and it's we look to Saudi Arabia. That seems to be the big example of that. I don't know. You're the political scientist.
Yes, it is. It is. I mean, Saudi Arabia, what is today we call Saudi Arabia, or the Arabian Peninsula, within the Muslim world, going back in time, was the primitive backwater of the Muslim world. The birth of Islam, that is the birth of the Prophet Muhammad, in the 6th century, took place in Mecca, which is today in Saudi Arabia or Arabia.
Yeah.
But Islam, after the Prophet, the faith tradition, the religion, Islam spread out of Saudi Arabia, of Arabia, and spread east and west into what was at that time the Byzantium Empire, that is the Roman Empire,
yes.
Eastern Roman Empire, controlled from Constantinople, city founded by the first Roman emperor who became Christian, Constantine.
Yeah.
On the one side, and on the other side was the Persian Empire. And then came the Arabs in the 7th century. And in one of those most remarkable episodes of history, we don't have the time to discuss it, so I'll just leave it with that remarkable episode. These primitive Arabs were able to defeat the Romans and the Persians and come to rule a vast empire that stretched from the Atlantic Ocean, North Africa, Spain, into India, parts of China, and then it spread further east, across seas and oceans into Malaysia and Indonesia.
Now, correct me.
This was a vast empire that came about,
huge.
I was
going to say, correct me if I'm wrong, but we only have we've got about 5 minutes left,
right.
But correct me if I'm wrong, but at that time, that's when we hear about all the, from the Saudi Arabia, from the Arabic Muslims, that's when all the great discoveries in mathematics and science and astronomy were happening, and it was kind of modern for the time in its way, and it had philosophies that were embracing of so many ideas. Am I incorrect in saying that, or?
No, you're not incorrect.
So because where did it change?
The Middle Age,
yeah, because that's like an Enlightenment time,
So during the Middle Ages, roughly between say the 9th century and the 16th centuries, roughly 700 years, the Islamic world was a dominant civilization in that part of the world.
That's right. For 700 years, they were in Spain.
Exactly, from Spain to India.
Yeah.
So it is one of the most challenging questions in history. What happened? How do you explain? How does one explain
that they went from somewhere so sophisticated, the collapse into primitive state?
Yeah. So how
which
does one
exists
explain the
even
collapse
today?
Of the civilization Well, I mean, there was the Roman civilization that collapsed. There was the Chinese civilization that collapsed. So their civilizations, they do collapse, they do die.
Yes.
And the Islamic civilization collapsed. I have talked about that or written about that in my book. I have explained that in part.
Yes.
It's a huge subject. People have spent volumes writing about it. It collapsed. And when it collapsed, the European powers emerged, and that was the making of the European world. That began sometime in the 17th century.
Right.
And came into the modern world.
Well,
and then you saw the Europe itself collapse.
yeah.
In the 20th century, Europe collapsed.
It did.
The 2 world wars.
And it's continuing, actually, and it's doing another collapse right now. It's with the EU. You know, we've got very little time left, and I want people to be able to get your book, which is Salim Mansur's The Qur'an Problem and Islamism. Where can they get it?
They can get it easily online from Amazon.com or Amazon.ca.
Okay, so Salim is Salim, and then Mansur, Mansur, and it's The Qur'an Problem and Islamism. So
Islamism.
Yes, it's
Qur'an Problem and Islamism.
Yeah, Islamism. Yeah, Islamism. The Qur'an Problem and Islamism, and that's on Amazon. So want people to get that. And we want to continue this discussion because there's so much. And I'd like to invite you back next Tuesday to continue this on, because I'm sure our listeners would like to hear more, because it's intriguing, and we need to understand. The West needs to know, because we're embroiled in it now. We're embroiled in the boiling of the Islamic world.
Yes, we need to understand, and we need to understand that even as the world has become what we talk about, globalization,
Mm-hmm.
the global village. Sure. Marshall McLuhan talked about the global village, if you remember.
Yes.
But the irony is that even as the world has shrunk as a result of communication and transportation revolution, we seem to have become even more between us or among us strangers. We know less about us now than maybe we knew a little while ago.
That's really interesting. Wow.
So that's an ironical thing,
Uh-huh.
you know. And yes, we rub shoulders to shoulder, but just think about it. Taking your subway in Toronto, you know, you sit together, you rub shoulders, but
Mm-hmm.
you're strangers to each other, and we have to overcome that. We have to talk about these things, about values and cultures and music, and come to realize that all of these struggles are human struggles.
We're going out now almost. So we have to not have fear anymore. So we're going to be going out now with a drink of water. I'm going to thank you, Dr. Mansur. Sorry, the time goes so fast, but we're going out now. And
Thank you
actually,
so much.
you know, and you know what's coming on next? The Punjabi Show.
Okay.
We're a multicultural radio station here, so it's just terrific. So thank you. We're going to have you on next week. So people tune in.
Thank you so much
for
for
Dr.
having me today.
Mansur. So fantastic. Thank you so much. And
Thank you.
and don't
All the
hang
best.
up. I'm going to chat with you in a second. Okay. Thank you so much. And stay tuned for the Punjabi Show right after this.